Thanks for tuning in. This is the Adventuristo. Apple just released its XS and XS Max phones, and one of the most touted features is the camera. Even though the specs sound familiar, the sensor is not only all new, but 32% larger. Since the resolution remains unchanged, that means larger pixels, which pretty much guarantees better quality. But how much better? Will it compare at all to the king of point-and-shoots, the Sony RX100 with a 1-inch sensor? Let's put these cameras to the test in a low-light environment and find out. Let's start by comparing 4K video. So here we have the new XS Max with the wide lens using the new sensor, which is roughly 26mm and has a 1.8 aperture. This is the telephoto lens with an approximate 51mm focal length, and it's f2.4 using the old sensor from last year. And here we have the RX100 at its widest focal length of 24mm, f1.8. And here we are at 70mm equivalent on the RX100, f2.8 is the widest the aperture opens up. So looking at them side by side, they both look alright. The RX100 clearly has more dynamic range and a lot more color. But the real differences sort of crop up when we zoom in. We crop in a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that here. And we can see that the RX100 is significantly sharper. It is downsampling the complete sensor readout, which is about 5.2K, down to 4K, giving it quality that's almost on par with the A6500. The biggest difference being low light, high ISO performance. Cropping in further still here, we can really start to see some of the difference here. If you look at the crosswalk there, the lines are clearly defined on the RX100, not so much on the iPhone, which looks very soft, very aggressive on the noise reduction. Looking at the long lenses, so longest end of the RX100 and the long lens of the iPhone, not looking at the difference in the focal length, we see that it's significantly softer on the iPhone. Of course, the ISO being doubled from the wide lens. We crop in and we start to see a whole lot of noise and a whole lot of noise reduction. And even though the RX100 is also at a high ISO, this is what I would call a night and day difference here. Especially when we crop in further, you can actually see people working out at the bottom of the frame there in the RX100. It's pretty clear. And the iPhone looks like a mess pretty much. Now let's take a look at photos developed from the raw images from both. On the iPhone, you are very limited in your camera settings. You don't have full control over the camera. So setting it to the lowest ISO it goes to in Lightroom Mobile, which is I believe 25, the shutter speed won't go any slower than 1/4 of a second. And that's what I had to work with. So I gave it the best settings I could and I processed it from there. And this is the result I got, which is better than previous iPhones for sure. But I'm not sure it really compares to the RX, but definitely a big improvement from previous iPhones here. The larger sensor helping quite a bit. As we zoom in, you can see there's a fair amount of detail there. Now keep in mind, this is the way I process my images, so this is really my taste. And I'm not so aggressive on the noise reduction, as you can see in this comparison here. But there is a lot more detail in the image I process. Looking at the crosswalk, the windows, there's a significant amount more detail. It's not bad actually. That's the image again, just so you can see it before we look at the RX100 images. It's not too bad. One of the biggest differences I notice is the lack of color information compared to the RX. Now, the RX being a real camera, it has real manual controls. Here I set it to base ISO, f5.6, and I let the shutter speed do its thing, and which was pretty long shutter speed, maybe 10 seconds. So there's a significant difference in quality here. When you look at the whole frame, you can easily see it. Of course, cropping will only reveal that further. So yes, the RX100 looks quite a bit better. However, if Apple decided to give us full manual control, we could do so much more with the iPhone sensor. Here, the telephoto lens shows a bigger difference between the two. It's of course, a stop slower than the wide lens, and so the ISO has to double, and that doesn't help things at all. But this is the best I could do with processing the image. It's significantly lower quality than the wide lens. And comparing here to the RX100, it's massively different. There's just so much more color and dynamic range on the RX100, and it's actually a very good camera. Sony sensors are always top of the pack for that, and the RX100 actually beats many 5Ds for color and dynamic range. So we can really see that difference here. This is a massive difference. Looking into a further crop, the iPhone is just an absolute mess in terms of shadow detail, noise, everything. Just any way you can look at that picture, it's not doing very well on this test. Now let's have a look at the out-of-camera photos from both of these devices. Looking at the default camera apps picture from the iPhone, we see that it's not as vibrant. It's very aggressive with the noise reduction to the point where it's a little bit soft looking, in fact, and it's not actually blur. I tried a few pictures there. It was actually on a tripod in this case. So yeah, it's being very aggressive with the noise reduction. RX100, not so aggressive with the noise reduction, but we can actually see a little bit of noise, but obviously it's much better with color, dynamic range, and sharpness and detail, of course. But you get the most out of these devices if you edit from RAW. Here we are side by side, and you can see that the RX100 image looks a lot brighter. I believe it was at ISO 6400 for this shot. It's not processed the way I would like, but overall it's significantly more appealing than the iPhone. Cropping in, what we can see here is that the iPhone is extremely aggressive with noise reduction to the point that detail is lost, but to some this might look a little bit better. There's significantly less shadow detail too. So what does this all mean for photographers and people who are thinking about comparing these cameras? Well, there's something to be said for the iPhone and the fact that it's always with you wherever you are, and it now allows you to capture a very decent image. Great quality. Compared to before, we're doing really well with cell phones now. But the fact that it's always with you, there's a saying that says the best camera is the one that you have with you. There is something to that. If you can see here, wherever I go, whatever I see, I will snap photos, I will take videos with my iPhone. And right here, what you're seeing is a massive crop on a 4K video. And this is the equivalent of something like 200 and something millimeter using the iPhone from the same balcony that I shot earlier. And that's not terrible for a phone when you don't have access to a longer lens. However, when the light drops, so does the quality. And as you can see here, the entire image is just dancing with noise. Use the long lens and it gets darker and even more noisy. And if you try to crop in some more, you'll really see that this is no 4K video. Of course not, well, with the digital crop, but the detail really gives it away that it is a phone anytime you do this sort of video. The RX100, on the other hand, is a fantastic camera. It shoots like a much larger camera, has quality like a much larger camera, and it can do so many things that the iPhone can't do. But you do have to charge it, you have to keep it with you, and you can't share directly from it, and it's best when you edit, which is part of the fun for me as a photographer. However, I also like to keep full frame cameras, so for me, it is a bit of a debate as to whether I should carry both an RX100 and a phone for those times when I don't carry my full frame setup. But as you can see here, the video is super sharp, super crisp, and it even gives you multiple options to edit the video with picture profiles, and the most powerful picture profile would be S-Log, which I've shot in here. Now, I am not a video grader at all, I'm not good at this, but I decided to try it out because it really expands your dynamic range. And this is shot at the maximum ISO, 12,800, and it gives you a beautiful image at night, so there's something to be said for that. For me, the quality of the RX100 is still so much better than the iPhone that I'm probably going to keep it around because I like to fiddle with my cameras and max out my settings at times and set up slow shutter speeds and all that sort of thing. And for the size, it's worth keeping around. Ultimately, the decision is yours to make, and I hope that this video helps you a little bit with that. This is the Adventuristo, and thank you for watching. Oh, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.